Iota at your service. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to make traditional wooden arrows, and hopefully I'll be testing them too. That was a very confident introduction because I've actually never done it before, so I have no idea if it's going to work. I'm hoping it's going to work though. But on a different note, very quickly, a couple of you have said in the comments, so I've received this as feedback from friends as well who have watched the videos, that when the videos are scripted that it seems very not flowing and not quite so good. So this video is completely 100% totally unplanned and unscripted, so we'll see if it's any better. By the way, in case you're wondering why I have a knife on my belt, that is because I've just watched Kramer's video about his Witcher garb, which is really awesome by the way, and he had a knife on his belt and I thought it looked cool. Yeah, I watched that video 5 minutes ago, so now you're going to be able to work out how long it takes me to edit videos, and I'm really hoping that this comes out before Christmas, because if it doesn't, the Christmas lights are going to be very dated. Okay, so I'm not totally 100% new to making arrows. I've made lots of these kinds of arrows, which are made out of aluminium, and usually they have plastic vanes, but for shooting off the shelf I had to make some with feathers, so I have used feathers before. So I'm not totally new, so I do have at least some idea what I'm doing. But I will be doing things a little bit different to how I've usually done arrows before, because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be seeing if I can fix the problem that I had in the last archery video I made, and that is the feathers coming off when you shoot over your hand on a traditional bow. I have stuff. I actually bought this ages ago, I just haven't had time to do anything with it. So I have sticks and feathers and sharp bits and somewhere bits that go on the string. I do know what all of these are called, I'm kidding. So the first thing I'm going to go through is what do you actually need to make arrows. So the obvious thing is you're going to need arrow shafts. I can't remember what type of arrow shafts these are. Okay, so these are POC shafts. They are 5/16 of an inch and they come pre-spined. Now the spine of an arrow is how flexible it is, and obviously the higher the poundage of your bow, the stiffer an arrow you're going to need. You can buy unspined arrow shafts, which means that the flexibility of them isn't measured, but that means that you need a arrow spine gauge so that you can select the shafts which suit your bow. So although unspined shafts are really cheap, they're not very good for guaranteeing accuracy unless you have a jig for measuring the spine. My research suggests that it's better to buy pre-spined shafts. So the next thing you'll need is nocks and points. Nocks are fairly standard. There are lots of different types of them, but I think they all work just the same. The only thing that might vary is how tight or loose the fit on the string is, but these feel okay on the string of the bow that I'm going to be using them with. Now these points are called a history point. I can't remember where I bought them from, but instead of like a field point where they're completely like parallel to the arrow shaft and then just come to a curved point, they have a little bit of shape to them, which I think looks a little bit more historical. Of course, realistically, if these were going to be historic arrows, I should be using broadheads, but they are banned at most archery ranges in the UK, and also they ruin targets, so I don't really want to use them at my home range. Now you'll also need fletchings. I think these are 3-inch fletchings, so they're 3-inch long. Feathers are handed, so that depends on which wing of the bird they came off. So the bottom bit of a feather either sticks out to the right or it sticks out to the left. That doesn't really make any difference whether you get left or right-handed feathers, providing all of your fletchings are the same-handed, because if some of them are rights and some of them are lefts, it will cause you a problem. I've got 2 different colours of fletchings. You need 2 different colours because on an arrow you're going to want the fletching that points at right angles with the string to be a different colour to the other two, so that you know which orientation to clip it on the string at. But you can tell without them being coloured just by looking at them, so if you really want them to all be the same colour, it will just take you a little bit longer to nock your arrows. And you will also want some glue. Now, I have this, which is a fletching adhesive that can also be used for Nocks, but it has to say that it's suitable for use on wood and on feathers because some of the adhesives aren't. You can just use ordinary hardware store super glue, but my ordinary hardware store super glue ran out. And you also are going to want some hot melt glue for attaching the points onto the shafts. This is the ordinary type of hot melt glue that most archers use to attach points to shafts, and I can't remember what it is. And then there's another one which is essentially the same thing, just made by a different manufacturer. Fun fact, this is actually called goblin snot. I'm not actually joking, that is what the manufacturer calls it. And that is also why I bought it. So I have no idea if it's going to work any better or any worse than this one, but because of science, I'll do some of the arrow points with this one and some of the arrow points with this one, and we'll see which one lasts longest. But that might actually take years to find out, so, you know. Now the other thing I have is I have arrow wraps. Now that is, it's like a sticky label transfer which you wrap round the shaft of the arrow. I bought these because I don't know how well the fletching glue will stick to wood, and on forums I was told that arrow wraps make the fletching stick better, and they also make it easier to change the fletchings in the future. However, it's a very unhistorically accurate thing to do. I'm doing it because I'm completely new to traditional arrow making, and it's going to give me a much better chance of this working. And you will also need a fletching jig. I don't know much about these, and I don't know what makes a good one, so I can't really give you any advice on that. I would recommend that you do your own research. You'll see how that's used when I get to fletching the arrows. If you want the arrow wraps to go on straight, you'll need an arrow wrapping jig. I made this yesterday because I wasn't going to buy one because they're quite expensive and look very easy to make. I did film the process, so I'll put that into the video. A source of heat. I've got a little chemistry set meths burner, which will work fine. You also need a arrow taper tool. This is an arrow taper tool. It looks basically exactly the same as a pencil sharpener. Now these come in different sizes depending on the actual diameter of your arrow shaft. So this one is meant for 5/16 arrows, which, like mine are. If you have thicker arrows than that, you'll have to get a different size. Let's get to arrow making. The first thing you've got to do making arrows, the first step, is to attach the nock to the shaft. That's always the first step because the nock has to be on the shaft to use the fletching jig, and the nock also has to be on the shaft to work out how long your arrows are going to be, unless you have a draw length gauge, which I don't. You'll see what I mean in a minute. In order to attach a nock to the shaft, you have to taper the shaft. There are two different taper angles on these. The steep one is usually for Nocks. I don't know if that's always the case, but it is for what I've got. And the shallow one is for points. So it's pretty difficult to see on the camera, but if you had one in your hand, you'd be able to tell. I am going to taper the shaft on the steeper taper angle. And you just keep turning it until the shaving stops coming off, because there's a piece of plastic at the end, so you can't go too far. There you go, it's stopped. And that is your tapered arrow end. Now to attach the nock to the shaft, you need to use a suitable glue. So it's usually advisable to test this before you try it on the arrow, but just put a dab of glue on the nock, on the side of it or something, and leave it till it's dry and see if it's gone brittle or gone powdery or dissolved or anything like that, and if it hasn't, you're good to go. I've already done that, so I know this glue is safe. Now I am just going to put a fairly generous amount, because too much is better than not enough, because you can wipe off the excess, around on the wood. And then I'm going to press the nock onto the shaft nice and tightly, and then I'm going to wipe off the excess. And then in 5 minutes or so, when that's dry, that will be done. And I'll show you how to measure the length of the arrow and cut the arrow shaft to the correct length. To find arrow length, you can get things called draw length gauges, I think that's what they're called anyway, where it's a great big long shaft and it's got divisions on it so that you can draw the bow and you can see what number is on the shaft at the point where the shaft passes the bow. Now, the correct arrow length is, so if you are resting the arrow on your hand like that, you would want a good 1.5 to 2 inches, so that there's no chance of overdrawing, which if you fired the bow it would do you quite a nasty injury. So for safety reasons you need to have a reasonable distance in front of the arrow, but not too much, because too much and the arrow won't shoot quite right, because there'll be too much weight in front of the bow, so when it starts to bend as you release the arrow it will affect its flight. I don't have a draw length gauge, so the easiest way to find out what length your arrow needs to be is, once you've got a nock on your blank shaft, you nock the arrow and you draw the arrow how you would ordinarily draw the arrow. Make sure that you're pointing at a wall or something, so that if you accidentally fire it you aren't going to harm anyone. And when you draw the arrow you get a friend or family member to draw on the arrow shaft, either exactly in line with the bow, so you can add a bit, or just a couple of inches in front of your hand. I will do that now. And because of the power of editing, a person has appeared right here to do this for me. Thank you very much. Perfect. So now I have my arrow length. So what I now need to do is I need to cut the arrow there and put the point on it. It's only wood, so realistically any saw that you happen to have will probably work, providing it's quite fine. This is a coping saw, but you can probably also use a junior hacksaw or something like that. So I'll just carefully cut the shaft on my line. You want to be careful not to end up splitting the wood or splintering it or anything like that, because that could affect how easy it is to glue the point on. Now that the arrow is the correct length, I'll just mention this quickly first. If all of your shafts are the same length, you can use the offcut from that to measure how much you're going to take off all of the rest of the shafts, and then that will get all your arrows to the same length. And I have 2 offcuts and you've only seen me make 1 arrow, and that is because I've filmed everything out of order and this is going to be a nightmare to edit, but we'll see how we go. The next step is to attach the points to the arrow. Now, as I said before, that is using the shallow version of the taper, so I used that side last time and now I'm using that side. It can be a bit difficult to tell, so it might be worth colour coding them with a blob of ink or something so you can see which side's which. I haven't done that, so I'll probably mess up. So same again until the shaving stops coming off. And as you can see, that's a much shallower taper and it fits the points nicely. The next bit is going to involve fire, so it might be worth moving all the wood shavings out of the way for safety reasons. And yeah, here's another thing I forgot to say you would need, and that is a pair of pliers. So first thing to do is to carefully put some hot melt glue onto the taper of the shaft. I'm not an expert, I'm not quite sure how much is the correct amount of glue to put onto the shaft, but you hold the glue over the flame, not too close or you'll burn it, until it starts to look nice and melty. Yeah, nice and melty is possibly not the easiest to follow description, but you'll get the idea after trying it, hopefully. And then I will carefully smear some glue around the edge of that. And I'm well aware that this is really messy and it's probably better to use less glue and do it less messily, but I'm sure it will work. The glue's obviously gone cold pretty much straight away, but that's okay because the hot metal of the point will melt it. Because the next step is to hold the point of the arrow in the pliers over the flame, and I'll give it probably 10 seconds to heat up. I don't really know how to tell when it's hot enough, but it should be hot enough by now. And the idea is I put that straight onto the end of the arrow and the hot metal will melt the glue and it will end up nice and even. And I'll twist it round a bit so that it's spread out on the inside. And then use tissue quickly while it's hot to wipe off the enormous mess that I've made. You see, the Goblin Snot glue is possibly a problem if you're not very tidy at this like me, because it's got a colour so you can see it when it's on the wood, whereas this glue is clear so you probably won't be able to see it. That said, I haven't tried this glue yet, so I'll put a caption on the screen or something to say if that's true or not.